We're back with another BizTalk Server to Azure Integration Services migration video. Today I'm joined with Sandro Pereira, who needs no introduction. My name's Kent Weir. I'm a PM on the Azure Logic Apps team. And then for those of you who may not know Sandro, all two of you, I'll let him go ahead and introduce himself.
Well, thank you. Many of you think that I'm the last guru on earth of BizTalk guru, no? The last piece standing and working with BizTalk, but not that. It's not that true. So I'm again Sandro Pereira. I work as a enterprise integration. I'm the head of integration at DevScope, and I do work with everything that is related with enterprise integration in terms of Microsoft. That means BizTalk Server and Azure Integration Server. So I love both technology and I work daily with both of them. So yeah, that's me. You may know me already with a lot of contribution, my blog and all the events that I do. And I think it's that.
And so
simple as that.
Simple as that. So, and Sandro was on the channel a couple weeks ago doing tips and tricks for Logic Apps. And so I will link that video in the description as well. It's been very well received, very popular. So go ahead and check that out if you're looking for some development tips and tricks for Azure Logic Apps. Now, one of the things that drove this particular video here is a blog post and some content that we had pushed out just before the holiday break around BizTalk Server migration to Azure Integration Services architecture guidance. And Sandro was one of the authors of this paper. And as you may have saw last week, if you were on the channel, that I had Michael Stephenson and Stephen W. Thomas talking about guidance as well. And so this is our opportunity to hear from Sandro, who works with BizTalk and Azure Integration Services every day, as he mentioned, and gives us this opportunity to go ahead and get his perspectives on how customers should be thinking about this. So I will include a link to this blog post and the prior video in the video description as well. Okay, so Sandro, I've got some questions here for you. Some of these questions are similar to the ones I asked Stephen and Mike, and then some of these are unique. But we'll go ahead and jump right into it. So, number one, I get Sandro on the hot seat here. I love it. Number one, what are some examples of BizTalk migrations that you've been involved in, and what is the biggest driver for these customers?
Well, I'm currently doing helping a client to set up a migration of BizTalk. I didn't do a lot of migrations to BizTalk. In a kind of in one shot migration, we are evolving our BizTalk integrations to start using more hybrid solutions. And in some cases, part of these integrations are going fully to Azure integrations. So that means that most of my current clients are using, my BizTalk clients are using more hybrid integration than do a one-shot migration to Azure, okay? But I'm being at the moment involving in a client to do this big push-up to another infrastructure. Well, depending on the clients, there are several drivers. That's kind of client base. These clients per se, they lack of visibility and no knowledge of BizTalk. So the partners that were working with them are no longer there. They miss a lot of expertise in BizTalk, some developers and architecture and all of this stuff, and even administration to control the infrastructure. So they are kind of orphans of these skills. And for a long time, they've been trying to remove BizTalk from their park of technologies and migrate to other solutions. We are currently doing that to migrate Hope to Azure. But this is one of the drivers. There may be another examples of different customers that they want to migrate, to remove server and licensing, all of this stuff. Some of them are the default ones, missing skills. We don't want to deal with infrastructure anymore. We don't want to create updates on the server and all of this stuff. I think the most important is for you to know what is your reasons to move. But choose the right reasons, okay? It's not kind of I want to migrate because I want to innovate, or I want to refresh, or something like that. So this is kind of buzzwords for me that doesn't make sense. Innovation happens in the old technologies or in new technologies, because most of the times we see people migrating from BizTalk to Azure and do the same stuff that they are doing in BizTalk in Azure. That's not innovation for me, okay? That's doing the same stuff with different technologies. So I think, and if you find the right reasons to migrate, you will not be upset or disappointed with some of painful that you will face on this migration, okay? Because you will face always, because it's different technology, you will face some issues and some ethics of migrating all of this stuff. Depending on the solution, this is not related with Azure. If you migrate BizTalk to Azure or to other vendor, you will face the same issues all over the place. They are different technologies. But if you choose the drivers, the correct drivers for that, for you, why you are choosing the migrate, you will not get disappointed on that. So I think most important for you and for the clients is to do an assessment to your solutions and what is the roadmap, what is the next step they are going to do, and decide what is the best technology to work. Because to be honest, I have two types of clients. I have clients that they are going to stay in BizTalk because they cannot move from BizTalk for several reasons, and they are clients that they have a good opportunity to go and migrate from Azure to, for example, for Azure. I have a client that uses BizTalk just to kind of process 3 Rosetta Net process or 4 Rosetta Net process. I think is overkill to have BizTalk in terms of licensing, just to process a small amount of process. Well, Azure is the next place to go. And I think they will fit better on Azure than staying with BizTalk, paying all the license and servers and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's depending on the client, depending on there's many drivers. We can point to every single one, but I think my point of view and what I advise to the clients is choose the right drivers. Okay, do not use the buzzwords. Do not migrate because everyone is migrating, and I don't know, starting to do hybrid and then go full to the cloud. Kind of go. It will be the easy way to move away from BizTalk and start doing these new enterprise integrations with Azure Integration Service.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I do like that idea of like keep your eye on the prize. And I think understanding what your drivers are first and ideally making them measurable so that you can go back to stakeholders and say, yep, we checked that box. Yeah, we checked that box. Maybe you couldn't check this other box, but at least having it very objective, I think is a good approach. And I do think that skill set is actually an important factor in all of this as well. It is something that I've heard from several of our customers as well, where you may have folks like maybe at a partner, as you mentioned, that maybe is no longer doing BizTalk, or those people have moved on to other opportunities, and I think employees are the same way. So I think understanding why you're doing it is super important. So I think some great feedback there.
Yeah, and I know that skills is one of the main issues because finding correct people with the correct skills is not easy. It never was. Okay, to be honest, it never was. But and despite the Azure integration is quite simple compared to BizTalk, in the entering point, you will face the same issues on the enterprise integration. Because enterprise integration is a specific niche of technologies that it's not a fancy technologies like Power BI that people like and see the results and sell fast. Integration happens and no one cares about enterprise integration until the point that it fails. Once it fails, they know your name, they know how to call you.
Yeah, I've been there.
Been there, okay? So if finding also correct skills in enterprise integration on Azure and other technology, okay, enterprise integration skills, it will not be that easy. The difference is that Azure is you will enter fast than in BizTalk. Okay, and the starting point will be quicker than in BizTalk, but in the other side of the coin is that that people that is not strong enterprise skills, they will design some solutions that are not enterprise ready. Okay, kind of I see a lot of in workflows, logic app workflows without no error handling, without controlling resuming the message, persisting the message, all of these that, well, if you work and if you came from BizTalk, you have all of these in mind because you know that this is how we work from 16 years old until now. And if you bring that concept of the on-premise integration using BizTalk and apply the same on the enterprise integration using Azure, it will be the best way for you to achieve all of these. Because, well, again, BizTalk and Azure, the goal will be the same. The thing, how you do is different, but all of these functionalities about to not lose a message, guarantee delivered, retry mechanism, error handling, it will be the same. Okay?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this last week with Mike Stephenson brought up some good points about, the barrier of entry being lower with logic apps, but the role of like an enterprise application integration architect is still very much needed. And, he put together a pretty good analogy about like using like a more democratized or lower barrier of entry to help scale an integration practice, but still having many of your like application integration people like setting up the standards, setting up the patterns, doing more of like the architecture to make sure things are set up properly, and then being able to scale because the tools are easier to use. And I think it was a pretty good point, and I feel like if you find that right balance, you can sort of achieve like the right outcome because you can get scale, but you can still address a lot of the things that you were talking about because those things are important. Like, yeah, I may have built a solution really fast, but if I'm losing messages under certain conditions, that's not the outcome the business is looking for.
Exactly.
So I think there's a bit of a balance to be struck there. But
and I can give you a quick true story without mentioning names, but in one of my last projects, when we were discussing the requirements of the integration, we were talking about one specific process, and once we finish the good scenario, well, this has to receive the message, call this to another system, and so on and so forth. well, the perfect scenario, everything works fine, no? I asked the guys, okay, and if there is a timeout or an error, what do we need to do? Everything was kind of surprised. No, it's not giving an error or a
Does not
timeout.
happen.
Timeout, no, it's on the cloud. It's a service on the cloud. It doesn't give timeout. It scales. Yeah, and I told him, trust me, it can scale, but at some point in time, I don't know, don't matter if the next week or 1 year, it will fail. Okay, and when it fails, I want to know what to do. And after half an hour discussing that, I didn't get any results. So yes, okay, let's go move on. 2 days after entering in testing, luckily it was test, but heavy testing, we get more than 1,000 timeouts. And I asked the guy again, and now, what is the worst case scenario? What do you need to do? Because kind of this, they were young people without no skills about enterprise integration. And just the matter of say, it's on cloud, it scales, it doesn't give any error. And that's not true, okay? At some point, it will fail, okay? Even if it's an expired token, something. But
Oh, the system itself could be down, the downstream system. It may not even be the integration platform. But yeah, you're right. Like you have to plan for failures. It doesn't matter how many nodes, how fast you scale, upward, sideways. You have to plan for resilient architectures.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah. So I got another really important question for you. What happened to Portugal in the World Cup?
Good question. We were robbed by Argentina referees.
No, we won't go into that. But no, Sandro's a big football or soccer fan, and he cheers for Portugal. I actually cheer for Portugal with him when my team Canada's not in. So I'm not trying to give him too hard of a time because they're my team when Canada isn't there, which is quite frequently. So
do not enter in discussion about football and soccer because it's football, not soccer. It's football, and it plays with feet, not with the hands. So
we'll leave that there. I'm sure we can talk for a whole hour on that. Okay, a real question. If you were helping a customer migrate from BizTalk Server to Azure Integration Services, what would be some of the advice you would provide your customer?
Well, several of them. So first of all, we need to start studying and do an assessment, a real assessment on what exists. Because what I see is that most of them don't have a good documentation of what is there. Okay, this is spread across multiple vendors and. Well, some of these, and you know this because you know BizTalk, some of the solution came from 2004, and that means kind of 20 years of a solution that is migrated, and all of these knowledge about the people that did initial that solutions are gone. So they don't. Most of them are not longer on the companies, or they are in different roles. So the first is to look of what exists and have a good assessment of what is there. I mean, it's about what systems to communicate, the highlight requirements of the integrations, and so on and so forth. Step 2 is to check how we can do it using the new tools, okay, the Azure integration. You know that there is Azure a BizTalk migration tool for Azure. I'm not a particular fan of that because I don't trust in the magic button. There are, but it's a good tool for you to have an overview, a starting point, and an overview of what can you do of an existing application and migrate to Azure. It's a solution that you can have at least an idea, and then move the pieces and choose the correct pieces and do it in a way that fits to your scenario. Mainly because, well, you buy BizTalk, you pay a license, you have everything there. Okay, you don't pay nothing else. You can process one message, you can process 1 million of messages, you pay the same. Okay, if that server doesn't handle that number, you put another server, you pay more license, and that's it. Okay, so you don't have surprises about the cost because the cost is clear. Well, in Azure, we don't have this control about the cost. Okay, we may have, but by default, it's difficult to have. And I know that in the beginning, many clients don't feel comfortable about Azure, so the cost is always something that they need to worry about. And we need to decide which kind of different service on Azure to use to specific stuff. And there are a lot of servers that have joined functionalities. They can do the same stuff despite they serve for different stuff. Okay, it's not Azure, but Flow and Logic App. Well, they are more like the same, but they use in different. One is Office 365 and another is in Azure. But doesn't mean that some of the pieces can go to Office 365 to Flow and others go to Logic App. But then we have kind of keyboard, keep secrets. We have app service. We can have a SQL table or database, no, to store configurations. So kind of 3 servers, as a simple example, that can do the same stuff, but in reality they serve for different purposes. But again, they can do the job. They have different prices. They have different SLAs. They have different limit throughputs and so on and so forth. So you have to choose the correct ones for you. Some of the companies, they like to go code first or no code first approach. And this is a driver for you to decide what kind of service you go to decide in the upper end when you are going to migrate. No, I can give you kind of in the solution that I created with Microsoft Portugal a few years ago. In paper, when we were designing the solution, we had API management, Logic App, and BizTalk working everything together. And we realized that having all of these pieces didn't work because we had a requirement of low latency requirement. And at that point, it was Logic App consumption only. And we cannot get 200 milliseconds. So we have to go and remove Logic App from the equation. That was an example. And we did code to be faster, and we kind of accomplished that. BizTalk, we couldn't remove BizTalk from the equation, so we had to add BizTalk there because that was an hybrid integration. So kind of in paper, everything fits, but in reality, when we try, we need to adjust this kind of service. So there is no magic button between migrating, kind of clicking a simple tool to migrate your existing solution to Azure. You need to kind of set up what is the list of service that you are going or planning to use. And then based on the requirements of each workflow, orchestration, service, whatever, integration requirement, you need to adjust this approach. Of course, we don't want to have a mess up with all of the service and creating, for example, calling direct stuff function and then direct stuff a Logic App and then all the stuff like that. So on my point of view, API management is a requirement. It's a must to have. And then we have a list of services like Logic App, Azure Functions, Key Vault, I mentioned SQL because normally SQL is sometimes used and important in some cases. App Insights, some cases stream analytics and loggings and so on and so forth. All of these make sense to have in your list to use to create all of these migration from BizTalk to Azure. Because, for example, in BizTalk, it's quite simple to have kind of an end-to-end trouble tracking, because well, it enters in BizTalk. You follow that tracking ID, you know that correlations and so on and so forth. Everything lives inside of BizTalk database, so it's quite simple to you to get an overview from what enters and what goes and so on and so forth. In Azure, it's not that simple. Okay, if you don't use kind of implementing your tracking capabilities, you have to look in a lot of stuff to have this kind of overview of end-to-end overview of your enterprise solutions. We can solve that by using some strategies of implementation and so on, but it's not that is completely out of the box for you, like in BizTalk, that you have a lot of things out of the box. You have to build a lot of stuff in Azure to have the same concept that you have in BizTalk. So having all of this in mind, knowing in advance that what exists it will not work the same on Azure, again, is expectations, manage expectations. And if you have these correct, you will not get disappointed and everything will work. And I do not believe also in a big bang migration. I think is too risky and a lot of time to do that. I think that you need to do step-by-step migrations. Choose and migrate a simple process, start with a simple process and continuous migrate to Azure. Like in the old days that we need to migrate from BizTalk, let's say 2016 to 2020, for example. We create a new server and you do side-by-side migration. The same concept should be applied here. Okay.
Yeah, and I think a couple points. So in terms of the like what technologies to use when, for the audience, like if you haven't checked out like the paper that I referred to earlier, we go through this and we try to be very prescriptive about it. Obviously, like Sandro gave a great example of like sort of the details matter. Like, you know, you might want to start with a low code, no code approach, and maybe there's scenarios that, you know, take you to a pro code approach as well. But we do try to do some mapping between like BizTalk components and then what might be the options inside of Azure Integration Services. And then we also talk about Azure Integration Services in terms of like when to use what technology, like when to use Service Bus, when to use functions, when to use Data Factory, when to use Logic Apps, API, etc. So mileage does vary, but at least we're trying to give you a head start from that perspective. And then I guess lastly, I totally agree with you, Sandro, about don't do a big bang. I think especially unless you've got a lot of experience already with Azure Integration Services, like there is definitely this applies to every technology, as you've mentioned. It doesn't matter if it was AIS or some competing product. Like there's going to be learnings that you're going to encounter as you go through this process. And I'm a very strong believer of like having your foundation in place. So that could be around like logging, that could be around operations, that could be about secret management, key management, you know, just sort of APIs, like how you want to sort of structure everything. And I feel like building that core out, then taking an example and building and migrating and getting it running in production, take those learnings because there's going to be learnings. If you're not learning as well, like I don't know, like I don't believe it, but take those learnings and then apply it to like subsequent applications that you then move over, because you do too much too quick, it's very difficult to get a big budget for remediation to come back and then have to redo a bunch of things that you've learned. And I know traditional IT budgeting doesn't really align to this, where it's like, oh, we get this fixed budget for this many months and we got to go. But I would really encourage people to have a pause, like do some work, measure it, understand it, and then say, what do we need to change? What do we need to fix? make those changes then when it's small, then go full speed ahead and start to do more and more. But don't jump in with 2 feet with your eyes and your nose closed and your ears plugged and just say like, this is going to be easy. Let's get it done in like a very short period of time. I don't think it's the right way for success. It's
and by doing that also you are constructing the foundations, and if it fails on the, because it will fail, it's not a matter of if it will fail, for sure, even if you are strong, by doing the first tries it will fail something, because something will be kind of broken or something that you need to fix, or a URL that something will fail for sure, always fails. But you are constructing the foundation. For example, on this logging, if you see that it's not completely correct, you're going to, and it's a easy fix because you only have one, and then the foundation is ready for the second and so on. And about the also the time consuming of the migration, sometimes it's not about moving the technology. It's about the business availability, because well, migrating from, for example, BizTalk to a BizTalk new version of BizTalk is quite simple. Okay, I can do a migration in a week or two, completely, even if it's sometimes from 2004 to 2020. In 2 weeks, I'm going to do that migration. That's not a problem, because the runtime is quite the same during the all over the years. That's why BizTalk is so secure and reliable. Okay, because it didn't change a lot. Okay, new stuff, new feature, but the engine is quite the same. But even when we migrate from a BizTalk to a new version of BizTalk, is not about the time consuming of migrating the solution, but is the tests with the business, because they need to approve that migration. They need to go and change the endpoints of SAP and other stuff, mainframes to point to the new URLs and so on and so forth. And they need to have availability. They need to do a battery of tests, and they need to approve that. This is the most time-consuming operation. And migrating from BizTalk to BizTalk is quite simple, because normally it's connectivities, because we didn't change the requirements of the solution. Now we have to change, because it's a different solution, a different technology. So the tests with the business will be longer, and that availability with the business is most of the times the critical part, because sometimes you need to join the ACP people with the IBM people, and they don't have the same agenda, and we are in the middle, and we need to wait for all of these people, and we have also to have availability for that. So sometimes it's quite difficult to set up these business testings. That's why big bands take so long to migrate. And when you migrate, you know that Azure is always changing in a continuous pace. So probably it's already obsolete in some ways. So yeah, a small migration is better than do a big bang.
Makes sense. All right, next question. So when considering BizTalk architectures and migration, what is an anti-pattern or something that customers should avoid or rethink as they move to Azure?
That's a good question, but I tend to avoid some of these integration patterns, even in BizTalk, okay? Because some of them I don't like to implement. For example, a convoy. Well, I never implement a convoy in my life in more than 18 years of working with BizTalk, and I'm not planning to do a convoy in Logic App. To be honest, I don't know how to implement the convoy in Logic App, because I do not believe on that kind of patterns. I think the best pattern that you can implement in integration layer, in all enterprise integration layer, is the most simple and stupid that integration is, the best it is. Okay, if you put too much logic inside the integration layer, that is a good point to a big nightmare that you will have in the future. Okay, so if you communicate with several systems, they have to implement their logic, or they should. Sometimes it's not. Well, this is easy to speak, but it's not easy to implement, because these teams will fight for, no, we cannot do that, and you have to implement this on the middle, and so on and so forth. It's always this time of discussion. But when you are able to do that and put the simplicity on the integration layer, everything will work like a shower. And I give you an example, a recent one, that we have to consume message from the service bus, but we have to deliver in order to the other system. Which, if you kind of think about that, it's not that hard. If we are going to use a service bus, we can do sessions, we can do first in, first out. In a kind of easy way, you can do that. Problem is, well, if we have an error with the message, then it goes to re-entering. So we have to block everything. Because, well, if you want to guarantee first in, first out, you cannot bypass that message. But if it's going to fail, we have to put, again, it's going to fail. We are not going to say fail, and in a second go try to send it, because it's going to fail nevertheless. You have to say, okay, wait 5 minutes, send it, because maybe you have a problem with the services down. Sometimes we have a weak endpoint, so we do not scale that. So we have kind of send 20 messages per second or something like that, because yeah, it still happens that we still find this kind of service. Okay, but well, we are stuck all the messages because I didn't deliver one of the messages, but I have, it's not a first in, first out. I need to guarantee per client, let's say this. Okay, so if I have 10 clients, well, I cannot say to the service bus, give me this client, give me that client. It doesn't work that way, no? So kind of in a simple situation, that a simple scenario, you think that it's quite simple to do that. If you start looking about error handling, worst case scenarios, it's not going to be that easy. Luckily for us, we decide to put, for example, a timestamp of that request. So the original timestamp of this message is going to be delivered through with the body in context of the message. And the end system is responsible to know, oh, I already got this is an old update, so I need to discard that because I have an update for 2 minutes ago, and this is 5 minutes ago. So this is what is for discarding. So I left part of that capabilities to the end systems, and my integration layer got simple. I don't need to worry about first in, first out, and respect the order. Okay. Otherwise, it should kind of be more complicated. And when we are speaking about 10 messages, not that critical, but at some point is 10,000 messages, and stacking 10,000 messages because of one message kind of getting complicated. So all of these convoy situations, all of these patterns processed by IDs and so on, I try to avoid implementing, okay? Or I try to design. It's not avoid implementing, I'm going to implement that, but designing in a different way. Putting some responsibilities on the end systems and not everything on the enterprise layer. Otherwise, I will probably go to use a SQL Server. Because if I put all, let's say I have a service bus and then receive everything from the service bus and put not sending to the end system, but put on the SQL Server, I then can pull the data per client, per different IDs in a simple way, because kind of this is SQL working, no? Give me
It's a
10
simple
messages for
query. Yeah.
it's a simple query. Give me the first message for all the clients, and I have a kind of a batch of 1,000, and I split on the entry point of the logic app and say, well, send it. Well, but you know that all of these patterns exist and they are properly documented, and people try to implement in the same way using convoys and all of this stuff. I try to avoid all of this stuff. Again, for me, if I try to put a simple and stupid integration, I call it simple and stupid. It's the best integration that I will design, and that's the integration that I will not give you any issues on maintaining the solutions.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. Like, I feel like simplicity is important, especially like you being a consultant where you're there for a fixed amount of time and then you move on to the next client. You want someone to be able to pick this up and sustain it. And I don't know who coined the phrase, but there's that phrase of like dumb pipes and smart endpoints. And I think that's like along what you're saying here as well. Like, keep your middleware, clean and simple, and then basically, if there's more complexity, let the end system sort of manage that. And I know oftentimes it's, there's a bit of a trade-off, right? But I think if you're sort of working with the customer in those teams and trying to work out what's the best, most supportable solution, I think that's generally a principle that a lot of organizations would buy into, because no one wants to, inherit a big complex monster. And, perhaps, some of those like legacy BizTalk solutions where they were over-engineered, they were overbuilt, and now it's very difficult to sort of move forward, especially with some of those people not being around. So on to the last question here. I guess, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel is worth mentioning here as we close out here?
Oh, a lot of things, no, but something that we didn't spoke, even Stefan and Michael. Let me think about that. Well, again, just rephrase. There is no magic button. There are two completely different solutions and technologies. But for me, both of them are great, to be honest. I can use both of them and use the two of them at the same time even better. But depending on the scenarios, you need to choose. And if you're going to choose BizTalk or you're going to choose Azure, Azure is where there is the new stuff happening daily. I don't expect to see too much innovation in BizTalk. BizTalk is a product with more than 20 years old. It's a stable product, but it has the functionality that it has, and I don't expect new functionalities to happen. But everything that is new is happening on Azure. Okay. Even if it doesn't exist in BizTalk, you can always do this kind of hybrid integration and connect both of these pieces and having an amazing enterprise solution on Microsoft landscape. Azure nowadays has all of these. We spoke about Logic App, but we have to realize that we have Logic App consumption and standard now. All of these process happen as standard can run locally, and locally was a big issue about migrating to Azure. We know that because it's not on-premise integration; it's a hybrid integration that you go to the cloud and come back to on-premise. So part of this can be happen also inside using Logic App standard. Forget about these concepts about migrating BizTalk to Logic App or something like that. BizTalk is not Logic App. Logic App is not BizTalk. Again, expectation matter. It's important to have the correct expectations. BizTalk is a product, a platform. Logic App is a service. So there is no comparison between one of them. We need to migrate. If you want to migrate BizTalk, you have to migrate to Azure and Azure Integration Service. Azure Integration Service is where are the main service, but it's not only the ones, okay? We have the Active Directory, you have permissions, all of these is not Azure Integration Service. Azure Integration Services are the main service, but you have to look as an Azure infrastructure, okay? Because you will need the OAuth, you need Active Directory, service principals, all of this stuff. When you are moving, you need to have this. This is not a one-man shot, okay? Do not expect a team of integration developer to do all this stuff. It doesn't happen. Azure is everything. You have to have a team with strong knowledge about Active Directory, networking, okay, because network is important. BNets, express routes, all of this stuff. It's not an enterprise integration that is going to solve this, okay? It's the same of BizTalk, okay? Because BizTalk also use Active Directory, networks, all of this stuff. You cannot manage with only one skills. You have to have a team of skills. And what else? I think, again, expectation matters. You have to realize that this is quite important for you. This is a team effort, not a one-man show.
Yeah, it's definitely a team sport. And I think I was talking with, well, Mike might have mentioned this as well, where it's kind of like, when we first started, even with, Azure Logic Apps consumption, you might have had a gateway in the mix, but it was generally like you didn't think too much about network. But
No.
network is now such an integral part of this, especially if you start to think about like hybrid integration, like you mentioned about, or even as more and more customers move their workloads to the cloud, they're still going to be accessible through like a VNet, or you're still going to want to access them through a VNet. So it is a team sport, and I feel like, yeah, you definitely need kind of that buy-in from your Azure sort of infrastructure folks, if I can use that term correctly. Whereas like there's going to be things that an integration team is going to need some support with, and it's generally around like network connectivity. It could be just around like billing and understanding what that means and what that looks like. The networking, RBAC control, maybe it's custom RBAC roles that you want to create so that your team has like right sized. And then I think super important, which we haven't talked about on this call, but DevOps is another one. Like that's something that you can't underestimate. That's something that should be your foundation. That's something you should figure out early. You don't want to be manually deploying a bunch of applications and then figure out your DevOps process and then orphan some of your earlier applications. That should be something that you think about quite early as well.
I was about to speak about that. It was great for you to mention, because the DevOps is quite important, because when in the old days we deploy a BizTalk solution, we do an MSI, or we copy the DLL and we have access to the production environment, and you copy and that's it, and you do all of this migration. It will not happen in Azure. Especially me, I work as a consultant. Normally I don't have access to production subscriptions. I have to do everything with the CI/CD. So my solutions, then I need to worry in advance about CI/CD, because we need to have all of these concepts about CI/CD to implement in our solution, because otherwise by default they are not ready for a CI/CD process. And unfortunately, each service has its own different ways to deploy. Okay, so Logic App standard we deploy in a way, Logic App consumption we deploy in a different way. API management is quite completely different than Logic App. Functions is quite the same of Logic App standard, but all of these services are not the CI/CD process is not the same. And there are other services that you don't have code. So for example, service bus. And I think service bus is a key component of enterprise integration on Azure. Okay, but what is service bus? We don't have a line of code for service bus. It's topics, subscriptions, filters, and queues, and access control. Okay?
Yeah.
So, but it was funny that I was a few months ago doing a project with Azure Logic App Standard, and one of the big issues that I realized was when I had to go to production, I didn't have access to the production subscription. So I asked, oh, I need to create the topic and the subscription and the subscriptions. We need to do the CI/CD process for that. But this is not code. This is kind of infrastructure, no? It was a funny talk with the client, and yeah, we had to do the CI/CD process. We had to do, and there are a lot of options for you to do. You have DevOps, you have, then we have Terraforms, then we have Biceps, and to be honest, all of them are great, but I think you need to use a mix of all of this stuff, depending on the scenarios. I use DevOps as much as I can, and then I go to Biceps when I cannot. So all of this deployment with the service bus and queues topics was made with Bicep scripts. And even, but that's not. Luckily, this is not integration skills requirement. Is all the infrastructure. Create all of the service bus namespace, create the BNets, all of these. You are going to do that with Bicep scripts or Terraform scripts or whatever. You are not going to manually create in there. You can create manually, but we are not going to create that in production manually, because normally even most of the IT guys do not have access to that. So you have to do with PowerShell script, and then, if necessary, requirement permissions to go to production and see what is there. No, so DevOps is quite important topic in Azure.
Yeah, and I think that's another sort of skill set that customers need to account for when they're doing these migration projects, is having someone that has a specialty in this, or at least having integration folks that are well versed in these as well. So let's leave it there. But thanks again for joining. Obviously, this has been really great to get your perspectives. If folks want to reach out and find you, what's the best place for them to find you?
Well, you have my email, sandro.pereira, devscoop.net. And then you have my Twitter account and my blog, Sandro Pereira.
LinkedIn. What about LinkedIn?
Yes, I have LinkedIn also. So you have all my social networks and my blog. And if you go to my blog, you find my email address there and all of my contacts there. So yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and make sure those links are in the video description as well. But Sandro, once again, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining me on the channel and
Pleasure is
talking
mine.
about BizTalk migration.
See you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.